Since its founding in the pages of House of X and Powers of 10, the nation of Krakoa has stood as a towering symbol of mutant kind's resilience, uniting the species in a desperate bid to escape a nightmarish future. Through this unity, Krakoa grew from an isolated island to a vast empire, launching the species far beyond the limitations of the world that feared and hated them, reclaiming mutant history, sparking utopian developments in culture and technology, and building a sanctuary where every mutant has the ability to take pride in their own identity. But every nation is built on compromises that eat away at them over time, and every empire must fall in the end. As I've discussed previously, the Krakoan saga started under writer Jonathan Hickman is seen by many as the ultimate reinvention of the X-Men and their central struggle, with an ever-growing roster of writers, artists, colorists, editors, and designers working to define the eternal struggle between man, mutant, and machine. And as the line-wide story continued, its ambition even outgrew Hickman's original plans, with the former head of X leaving the narrative in the hands of his many collaborators. As such, 2024's Fall of X is the line's most ambitious chapter to date, attempting to close out the X Office's many stories, as well as Hickman's, before moving the line back to a more recognizable status quo. But that's easier said than done. With the revitalized popularity of the X-Men brand, the murkier morality questions of the era, and the sheer number of creative visions in the mix all impacting this chapter, a few big questions hang over its finale. Can the nation measure up to the ideals it set? What effect will its presence and absence leave on its heroes? And what legacy will this era leave behind in the larger mutant metaphor? Here I will examine this last chapter's many comics, how they interact with one another, and how they set the stage for what's to come, to untangle the bittersweet end of the Krakoan Age. Spoilers for the line-wide story and individual titles to follow. Fittingly, the Fall of X draws on everything built up over the last 5 years of storytelling in X-Men comics, namely the overarching plots of changing the future teased in Hoxpox, Krakoa's cold war with the human supremacists of Orcus, and the steady corruption of its leaders as they become everything they fight against. In fact, just like the preceding chapter Destiny of X, Fall also builds directly on the implications of Hickman's Inferno miniseries, with a divide between Krakoa's leaders and citizens becoming the central conflict and giving the line some much-needed momentum. What follows is an absolutely explosive opener, with dual events Axe Judgment Day and Sins of Sinister putting the mutants at the center of pivotal moments in the Marvel Universe. Judgment Day, written by Kieran Gillen and illustrated by Valerio Schiti, charts a three-way crossover between the Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals, with each group judged by its secrets and failures by a celestial god known as the Progenitor. Personally, I think it's rad as hell, with the heroism of the X-Men breaking through the cynical nationalism of Krakoa. If Inferno ended with mutants walling themselves off from the outside world, Judgment Day ends with them triumphing over this self-isolation, confronting their past mistakes and using their gifts to enrich the world around them. However, this triumph is also accompanied by a warning of things to come. Anyone can be a hero given the chance, but making that heroism last is another matter entirely. When reflecting on the event, Gillen would state, Judgment Day is an attempt to write the whole Marvel universe at once, but it's also about people, in every form, superheroic and otherwise. Valerio and I were always thinking about the human perspective in the book. While the power fantasy of reading comics is that you'd be the hero, it's also worth reminding us, especially in this kind of story, about what it means to be good in a fallen world, with various people trying and failing was something that felt key. We should be thinking more. Every day is Judgment Day. By contrast, 2023's Sins of Sinister swings the line into much, much darker territory. Framed as a kind of dark mirror to Hoxpox, the event sees Sinister's long-running plans finally kick into action, using his hacked Krakoan resurrection to take over the Quiet Council, then the world, and eventually the galaxy. Of course, this is Sinister we're talking about. He's kind of an idiot, and even though he's able to corrupt the Council, their own flawed egos quickly reassert themselves, leading to a stunning reversal of the Mastermind's plans. And these flaws only get worse as each of the event's stories jump further through time. The Quiet Council's uneasy alliances with one another steadily fracture into open war, with each faction vying to achieve their version of the dream by any means necessary. Even the more transformative changes of Krakoa's heroes fail to stop this corruption, with Nightcrawler's developing mutant culture twisted into an oath of complete, self-destructive devotion. And though elements like Storm and her Brotherhood act as the last sparks of hope in this timeline, even they eventually crumble under the weight of this failed paradise. While not as tightly paced as its predecessor, with Gillen sharing writing duties with Al Ewing and Cy Spurrier, along with a much bigger stable of artists, Sins of Sinister still manages to keep its message focused. Through Sinister and his clone siblings, each of whom were teased throughout the line, we finally get a vehicle to explore the darker side of the Krakoan dream. A nation that, in spite of its many advancements, is still built on a need to conquer and exploit, and will fall because of its inability to learn from the past. The alternate future, or present, is one of those core X stories for lots of reasons. X-Men is about how the world could be. It's about the future, and what we're going to make it. Gillen continues. What happens if Krakoa goes really wrong? For all his sins, Sinister believes mutants' potential. That's part of what's interesting about him now. Having someone as bad as Sinister on the Quiet Council is a reminder of the deal they made to have all of this. And I think in some ways, the what if makes you think about the what is. How many good people are on the Quiet Council? Can we be better? Because we're in charge now. We've got no excuses. We've got a country to run. Even after the timeline is reset, courtesy of one of Sinister's cloned Moira engines, long story, really could have used a data page here, the terror of this revelation sends ripples across the line, casting a light on Krakoa's many ongoing problems. Beast's imperialist approach to security has finally turned the heads of X-Force and Wolverine, who make it their mission to shut down his personal kill squad. Apocalypse's fragile peace with Amenth, a development that's held since Ten of Swords, erupts into a civil war on Arakko, and numerous heroes like Storm, Legion, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler, all still reeling from the Council's betrayal, cut ties with the nation, leaving the few who remain to question what all their good work has actually built. The lines before the Fall tie-ins only continue to pick away at this weakness, with the nation's image tarnished by a series of fake attacks and propaganda pieces by Orcus. At first glance, this loose duology of events seems less impactful than Krakoa's previous crossovers, leaving us pretty much exactly where we were at the end of Destiny of X. I guess Rasputin's here at least. I like her. This opening does, however, deepen the thematic conflicts that have been building from Krakoa's founding, leaving a lingering sense of doom in the air. Is mutant kind's fall inevitable? If it is, how will its founders react when their nation finally breaks? And what will become of the countless people it helped raise up?
They talk, and I watch, and watch, and while the arguments rage over revealing what Sinister did and undid, I notice something. The leaves. I ask Krakoa what's happening. They tell me. It is a word that has many meanings in Krakoa's language. It has at least 2 meanings in English too. Why are the leaves rotting? It's fall.
Since its beginnings, a mainstay of the Krakoan era has been its exploration of the murkier morality of the mutant nation, interrogating whether or not the freedom from suffering is worth the suffering of others. It's a direction that adds a lot of depth to the larger metaphor of mutants, showing the importance of transforming the world instead of internalizing its hate and fear. Of course, superhero comics are by and large built around broader tales of good versus evil, and that format can be incredibly hard to break, especially when a new direction leads to the limited but somewhat fair critique that you've simply turned your heroes into villains. At some point, the X-Line had to course correct, and nothing better represents that than the massive tonal shift of 2024's Hellfire Gala. Introduced in 2021 as a yearly crossover to celebrate Krakoa, the gala quickly turns tragic as Orcus finally makes their war with mutants public, killing several big-name X-Men and using Xavier's unwillingness to trade lives to stage a massacre of both humans and mutants. It's sudden, brutal, and to many, even tasteless, not helped by the fact that we're introduced to the most diverse X-Men lineup in years, only to see them brutally blown up by Nimrod. But at least they got their chance to shine in, oh boy, Dead X-Men. That's just mean. What follows is a desperate gathering of allies, both hero and villain, as the survivors of Krakoa attempt to rally against Orcus's war of extermination. If you ask me, it's exactly the kind of momentum the line needed, finally reaching some of the spectacle teased in earlier visions as the old rules of good and evil are recobbled into something much, much bigger. You could even argue that this takes the larger theme of cooperation and mutant circuits and expands it to encompass the whole Marvel universe, with this newfound unity catalyzing new arcs for each character and team. Unfortunately, it doesn't really dig as deep as it could, at least not consistently. Naturally, all the mainline books build on the aftershocks of the event fairly well. Both X-Men and Immortal X-Men address the fallout directly, with Krakoa's heroes trying to rebuild while its leaders reckon with their failings. After the loss of the nation, X-Force is able to mostly break away from their murky beginnings, becoming a sanctuary in the Arctic for other survivors. Instead of breaking Arakko, X-Men Red's civil war ends up reuniting it, with the planet's many factions turning their newfound strength back on Orcus. Unfortunately, a lot of this urgency is lacking from the line's other tie-ins, with Uncanny Avengers, Invincible Iron Man, and Ms. Marvel hinting at broader developments without getting too direct, while promising standalones like Alpha Flight, Children of the Vault, Realm of X, Uncanny Spider-Man, and more are buried under bigger titles that are seen as more essential, which kinda sucks when you remember that the original purpose of the era was to highlight everyone through the line-wide narrative. It doesn't help that many of the line's titles have gotten broader in both theme and presentation, with most of these stories being crammed into limited arcs or series that either keep the message too broad or end right as things start to get interesting. I mean, why even bring Louise Simonson back as a writer if you're not going to give her the spotlight here? Instead of building a climax, this sudden scattering of Krakoa's people feels like a jumble. Each story has something worthwhile to say, but for the moment, everything post-Hellfire Gala feels like a step back, as readers get bounced between a number of perspectives, all while trying to balance the line's grander plot. There's some introspection here and there about the nature of Krakoa, but all of that is subsumed by the much more black and white battle with an enemy that's quickly supplanted by the machines and their eventual leader, the Dominion that was once Nathaniel Essex. And even though there's a lot of quick and dirty board clearing involved to get there, it's through this development, alongside Charles Xavier's eventual collapse in the final issues of Immortal X-Men, where I think this chapter finally finds its heart. When you strip away everything that's been built up over the last 5 years, Krakoa is ultimately the story of Xavier's idealistic dream colliding with the realities of the world, a paradise built on seemingly necessary evils. And it's this pull between hope and nihilism, evolution and destruction, that become the basis for the line's final climactic act. In the end, is Krakoa better than the suffering that shaped it? And will the good it created outlast its fall?
It's too late to let go now. I will hold on to this rock as it sinks. But as long as I live, I will not let their memory be desecrated by those who bathed in their blood. No more. No more. No more.
From its first introduction in 1981, the haunting world of Days of Future Past has hung over the X-Men, with the team's struggles for acceptance steadily growing over the years into a species-wide war for survival. It's this ever-present thread of the future that inspired Jonathan Hickman and his original vision for Krakoa, uniting the entire species to craft something more utopian, a future where the mutants always win. And yet, the cyclical nature of superhero comics means there will always be a reset lingering on the horizon. No matter how much has changed, everything has to be put back where it was eventually. As a result, these cycles become their own layer of meaning in Hickman's story. Can the utopian nation of Krakoa transcend these threats and cement itself? Or are mutants doomed to face the same future over and over again? Fittingly, this last act is framed as one big meta-commentary on change itself, the dual series Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10, which acts as an inversion to the event that started this era, follows Mutantdom's last desperate counterattack on Orchis, while Professor X, driven to the unthinkable, weighs whether or not to stop Essex's dominion by stopping the formation of Krakoa. Given how much of the nation was tied to these bigger questions, it's a pretty solid concept, at least in theory. Hoxpox's greatest strength was its focus, using a mix of pacing, history, and interplay between artists R.B. Silva and Pepe Larraz to merge two stories into one tale of triumph. By contrast, Fall and Rise end up suffering from the same lack of focus that's plagued the line for a while now. Instead of two intertwining books, the story ricochets between all of the line's ongoing titles, with plots, characters, and events hurled into and out of the story at breakneck speed. Pretty much all of Orchis is swept out as quickly as possible, with some big bads left stewing in what they've done, while others, like Moira, get a redemption that I don't think is remotely earned. Many of the previously separate teams or heroes, like the dead X-Men, get thrown into the main event to say their piece and then check back out for good. Even the metaphysical subplot to resurrect the Phoenix gets breezed through so quickly, it just sounds like gobbledygook. It's the same kind of unevenness seen in X Lives, X Deaths, but exponentially bigger, and really shows how, without that unified vision, the line itself sorta falls apart. Not that I'm blaming any of the writers, artists, or editors here. It's clear that bigger outside mandates were at play over the fall of X. When asked about the line's ongoing changes, senior editor Jordan White would reflect,
"I'll be real with you. I didn't ever want Krakoa to go away. I wanted Krakoa to be a piece of Marvel forever, so it was a bummer for that to not be the case. There were definitely things we wanted to do that didn't happen. I get hesitant to say all of them because the creators may still want to try to do some of them. Lots of concerns go into whether a book gets made. Some of them are creative, some of them are financial. Some of them are, do we have a creative idea? And some of them are, do we think we can sell it? Some of the ones that didn't happen are for sure bummers to me. There are so many things that we had hoped to do."
There are countless factors that impact a comic's development, not the least of which is that comic's popularity. Krakoa launched a renaissance for the X-Men, and with that newfound popularity came tie-ins like the animated series X-Men 97, as well as the upcoming film The Mutants, both of which draw from the stories and iconography of the title's past. It wouldn't be the first time synergy has impacted comics, and I wouldn't even say it's the most egregious example of that either. Thanks for that, Kev. This tension between the past and the future can be felt across this whole chapter, with callbacks to the past showing up more and more the deeper we get into the finale. It would be incredibly easy to end this era with another soft reboot, to walk everyone back to where they were before and start it all over again. And yet, in spite of these inconsistencies, the creators behind the line still managed to dig deep and channel the spirit that Chris Claremont tapped into decades ago. Evolution is inevitable. Change matters. The four-part resurrection of Magneto by Al Ewing and Luciano Vecchio is the perfect story to explore evolution in the face of an unchanging world. Having Storm and Magneto journey through the afterlife and their own past, only to emerge more dedicated than ever, fighting for what could be instead of the memory of what was.
They look at me with such expectation. Which Magneto am I? Their Magneto? A good man? I will try. Try again. It is all I can do. And yet, I fear it. We must be wary of good men, for what will we not do? What will I not do?
This same spirit echoes across the final act, with Jean Grey uniting all of mutant kind inside of the Phoenix Force to destroy Essex's dominion, while Charles and Moira sacrifice themselves to the cause in one last act of goodwill. But of course, this tension is most present in the landmark issue X-Men number 35, acting as both the era's finale and the legacy 700th issue for the Uncanny X-Men title. Instead of a single story, the issue is broken into a series of vignettes, uniting the era's creators alongside veterans like Chris Claremont, Walt Simonson, John Romita Jr., and Salvador Larroca to show how the many corners of the mutant diaspora continue to evolve beyond their former paradise. We're even treated to the re-emergence of the survivors from the White Hot Room, teasing the promise of a Krakoa without the flaws of its predecessor. Naturally, not all of Krakoa's people welcome this evolution, and the lines are drawn almost immediately, with many characters undergoing a full reversion. And while this can definitely feel frustrating, the issue also treats us to the hopeful future teased at the very beginnings of the era, a future where pain and prejudice are distant memories, and everything that was lost has been restored, infinite generations bridged into a new dream.
You started it. We finished it. A mutant circuit. Krakoa.
Like any relaunch, Krakoa wasn't perfect, and the new era to come out of it is just as polarizing, despite the line's new talent and their commitment to building on these ideas. But ultimately, I think it was the rebirth X-Men needed after a near decade of editorial confusion, showing us just how high mutantdom could soar if everyone stood in solidarity of one another. And through that solidarity, we got to explore countless facets of the mutant metaphor untangled from their pain. Families could reconcile, past traumas could be confronted, and every mutant could find the purpose and community needed to reinvent themselves. Of course, the cyclical nature of comics always demands a return to form, resetting the board so new creative teams can build their own vision. Oftentimes, this can feel like regression, but sometimes, an era's legacy can persist long after it's ended, changing the very meaning of the narrative. And if the newest wave of X-Men titles indicate anything, it's that the legacy of Krakoa is alive and well. It's not a dedication to a nation, a leader, or a dream that propels us forward. It's the faith in ourselves and one another that gives us the means to build a future free of hate and fear, to move beyond the dreams of the past and reach for something even better. After all, it's not a dream if it's real. Thanks for checking out today's video, the final installment on my coverage of the Krakoan Age of X-Men. It's been an incredible journey following the story since Hoxpox, and as you can probably guess, I've got a lot of complicated feelings on how the line evolved over time. But at the same time, I think a lot of the beauty of these stories comes through those changes, and while there's plenty I don't really connect with, the more I look back, the more I end up cherishing what every idea managed to add to the grander picture of Krakoa. So, to anyone who gave their time and energy to the X-Line, thank you for your work. If you like this video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every little bit helps the channel out a lot. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Carol Ann Brenneman, The Comics Cave, Dom DeFelice, and my patrons, who are helping me to grow this channel and continue doing what I love, and hopefully what you love too. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay uncanny.